In this video, we'll walk through adding patient files, adding patient claims, and going through the ledger within the patient claim. To open the patient files, go to the top leftmost icon with the two people and give it a click. Here the most recently worked with patient will appear, or if this is the first time you started the program up for the day, instead you'll see a list of all your patients. Either way, you can select the patient you want, and their information will appear on the screen. Here we have the various tabs of information such as additional info, relations and contact, and the user definables. After that, we have all the EHR Meaningful Use Module tabs, which are only applicable if you've purchased the Meaningful Use module. If you need a refresher course on any of the info or tabs located in this screen, please refer to the How to Set Up TPS CD, specifically the Patient Information video. If I wanted to add a new patient, I could hit the plus button up at the top here. When I do so, I get a couple options. First, it asks if I want to add a blank patient record, and if I hit yes, it's going to give me a brand new screen, completely empty, that I can start over with to add my new patient. If I hit no, I want to copy the information of this patient to a new record, I can do so, thus cloning the existing information. Sometimes you may have a parent and a child or a spouse who have incredibly similar information as far as the address, home, city, state, and zip and all that go. It may save some time for you to do a copy. Clicking cancel will cancel this function completely. Once you've created your patient, you would then open the patient claim section, and if you had not created a claim yet, it would prompt you to create a claim. If you have created a claim, you could get a list of the patient claims if there were more than one. Here we can see that Tracy Triple has 3 separate claims. If I wanted to add a new claim to her, I could again hit the plus icon at the top here, and once more I'm asked if I want to create a new patient claim with the patient information only, that is, the information found over here in the relationship to insured, in the last, first, middle, initial, etc. I could click no and create a clone of the existing one. That way, if the new claim was going to be very similar to the old one, except for maybe an insurance carrier and a couple extra pieces of information, I could save some time doing that. If I need to back out, I can simply hit cancel. Here's our claim screen with the first responsible tab, general, visit info, etc., etc. Again, if you have any questions about the tabs and the information found within and what best to fill it out with, please refer to the Setup Wizard videos in regards to the patient claim setup on the How to Set Up TPS CD. Now, one thing of note about the patient claims in TPS is that you can have multiple claims per patient. Let's say a patient has an injury that they see you for, such as neck pain. Well, you could create a patient claim for that and attach it to the patient's file. Now they get into a car accident a couple months later and they have some lower back pain they need to see you for as well. You can create a new claim, perhaps even with a different carrier, separate from their initial claim that attaches to the patient file without having to create the exact same patient over and over again. This way you could have 2, 3, 4, however many claims you need for a patient without having to enter the same information over too many times. Each claim is separate from the other one, which means that all financial information, billing information, and insurance information is separate from one claim to another. When I add a service to one claim, it doesn't carry over to the next one, and when I make payments on a claim, it doesn't carry over to the others. If you have a patient who's no longer seeing you or needs to be inactivated in some way, going to the General tab, and then the bottom right where it says Claim Status, you see the Active Claim checkbox. When it's checked on, this indicates that the patient's claim is active and is shown here in the top in parentheses. When I inactivate it by clicking the checkbox, it will inactivate the claim, and when I switch off and switch back, we can see that it now says inactive at the top. Basically, what this does is it prevents you from adding services to the patient unnecessarily, because if they're inactive, it's assumed that you no longer need to interact with them on a day-to-day basis. You can also no longer schedule for this patient. However, you can still make payments and bill out on outstanding services in case anything's owed. Let's go ahead and reactivate the patient. Now here we have the Problem List tab, where you can add your diagnosis codes for the patient's claim. These are the default diagnosis codes for the patient and are not locked in stone, and you can assign different ones to specific services. We'll go over that process a little later. In the meantime, over here on the left is a list of all the diagnosis codes you've entered into your system. Note, you don't have to include every single ICD code that exists. You just have to include the ones that are pertinent to your office. For instance, if your patients aren't often getting yeast infections, or rather not seeing you for them anyway, you don't have to add that one in there. Something along the lines of a 721.0 though, that might be a little more useful. You can sort the diagnosis codes by the code itself, as is displayed here on the left, or by the name by clicking this name button. If you know them better by name, you can simply type in the name itself to find it quicker. Otherwise, you can sort it by code if you know that better. Do whatever's easiest for you. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a couple diagnosis codes. 839.0, and we're going to add in 756.2. All right, so you can see here, as I clicked them, they were put into the system with a 1 and a 2 to denote which diagnoses they are, with the code, description, the type, the date it was diagnosed, which is today's date, but can be changed if necessary. And here we can see whether the status is active, inactive, or resolved, the provider who diagnosed this patient, and an update date used for billing purposes. Over here on the left, you can do some more sorting by selecting certain categories of diagnoses. You can also search. If I type in 7, it's going to give me all the codes that have a 7 in the code, and if I switch it to name and type in P, it's going to give me all the diagnoses that have a P in there. Of course, you may want to type in something a little more specific, such as abdominal, and it'll give you results that match exactly with the word abdominal somewhere in the diagnosis name. Same thing goes for the codes. If I wanted to, I could continue adding more diagnoses codes, but I won't for now. And now we're going to move on to the ledger, the final tab on the far right, and one of the most important in the patient's claim. Here we can see the ledger for Tracy Triple. The ledger has a lot of information. Some of it comes from the services screen when you enter services, some from payment screens, and some from the patient's claim itself. For instance, over here on the left, we have the visit date for the service or the payment date for the payment. You'll also notice that the ledger is color-coded. Here, these green lines indicate that the balance has been met in some way by the carrier or the patient. Here, the carrier was charged $150, and the carrier has paid $150. The total charge was $150, so the service has been closed out and accounted for. Thus, it has turned green. These white lines down here indicate that there's still an outstanding balance left on this service. Here we can see that nobody has paid for this patient charge or this carrier charge. Now, if the carrier paid all $40, but the patient still owed their $328, this line would still remain white because there is an outstanding balance. Here we see a pinkish peach color, indicating a payment made through the payments, refunds, and transfer screen. Almost all payments are this color, except for cash payments made through the services screen, which are a much brighter pink. Currently, these are the only colors displayed in this particular patient's ledger. However, transfers are represented with a yellow color, refunds have a purplish blue, and as I said before, cash payments from patients in the services screen are represented by a hot pink, bright pink color. With color coding out of the way, let's go ahead and discuss some of these columns and the descriptions for them. As I said before, this is your visit date or payment date. The CPT code and description are both fairly self-explanatory. Quantity of the service. The total charge. The total charge is a combination of the carrier portion, the patient portion, and any amount that has been adjusted off. Between those three, we cannot have any amount equaling greater than the total charge, otherwise one of them has to be reduced. Here, where it says carrier and where it says patient, show the patient and carrier portions. Where it says carrier paid and patient paid, it shows any amount that the patient or carrier has paid towards their portion. Here we have the discount field representing any discounts for a service. The adjust off field showing any amounts that have been adjusted off, such as this, this, and this. Comments to be made about an adjustment. Any on account balance that has been put onto this patient's account. A general comments field. The primary, secondary, and tertiary carrier paid fields show how much the primary carrier paid on a service versus the secondary versus the tertiary. Scrolling to the right, we see the business that was associated with the service, the provider associated with the business, the source location for billing information, a facility if there is one, the ordering provider if there is one, the source type, the activity and/or inventory category that was associated with this, and the diagnosis key. When clicked, you can see specific information about the diagnoses assigned to the specific service. Now, when this service was added, this patient didn't have any codes, so they get a default key of 7. If I go to a different claim, such as Tracy Tripple's second claim, we can see a 6 here, representing a combination of these 3 codes, the dates they were diagnosed, along with the provider. After the diag key, we have the year-to-date visits showing visits for this patient up to this year. The number in series is a specific number that you can set on your own to track visits for a specific purpose. The visit number is the total number of visits for a patient since they've ever been entered into the program. Any authorization number. Deductible used on this specific service. Copay used on this specific service. And here we have a fairly important feature of the ledger, the carrier billed information section. You'll notice that it's gray so that it stands out. Now we haven't gone over billing yet, so some of this may be a little confusing at first, but is still fairly invaluable. Here we have the date the carrier was first billed, the number of the specific bill, and then the number of the batch that this bill is located in. If you click on this section specifically, the information down here will change to reflect how many times this service was billed. Here we can see the very first time it was billed, and all this information lines up with what we see in this gray area. However, it was also run through a tracer twice, a couple days later, as denoted right here. If you're having trouble tracking down certain bills, coming to the patient's ledger, finding that specific service, going to the carrier billed portion of the ledger, clicking on it, and then viewing that information can help you find out where a particular bill might be as far as batch or when it would have been billed. This will also show patient statements as well as carrier and attorney statements. Continuing on, we see some codes that can be applied to the service. Emergency, family, EPSDT condition, service types, rental frequencies. These are all conditional qualifiers that can be attached to a particular service if necessary for your billing purposes. DMERC for DMERC services, and then we have certification types, quantities, CLIA outs, section for CLIA information, and then the time start and time end. Now that concludes the description of the various fields within the ledger. So let's go ahead and scroll all the way back to the left and address this beginning balances button. When I click it, a new display appears with a line for each provider in the system. Here I can add the date of a balance that existed before I had TPS but had a patient. So if you're coming from another program or a paper system, instead of entering in every service as it was entered in one of those systems, you can go ahead and just simply put the patient balance, the carrier balance, and any on account that may have been. So if your patient's coming from another program and they owed $100, you can go ahead and put in $100 here. Save the beginning balances, and then there it is, under the patient portion. Now, this is an existing patient, so we don't need this. So I can click the button again like that. Notice that the balance is still here. Remove it. Remove the date as well. Save it. And it's no longer there. Now, while you can adjust payments in the ledger, you can adjust the charges that have been made to a carrier or patient. For example, let's take this claim. We have a few services here, all from the carrier. And then we get a notice or an EOB or something indicating that the carrier is not going to pay any of these. We don't want these figures to reflect on our accounts receivable, so we would like to adjust them off. You can do this by selecting the Auto Adjust button down here in the corner. Clicking it will cause a new display to appear with a date range you can enter for the dates of service you would like to adjust off for. So I'm going to just blank this out because we're doing all the services in the entire claim. And if I don't have a date here, it simply goes back to quote unquote the beginning of time, the earliest date in this particular section, in this case the claim. And we're going to do it up to today. And we want to adjust off a total of, yeah, that's good because we want to adjust it off and that's a really huge number anyway. We're going to just unselect patient portion even though the patient doesn't have any. But if you wanted to do just the patient, you would click this one and then deselect this one. If you wanted both, you would make sure they're both checked off. Whichever is checked, that's going to get adjusted off of the carrier and or patient. So I'm going to deselect that one. And here you have an explanation as to why it's being adjusted off. Will not pay. Simple, but effective. Now, once you're done and ready to adjust, you can click the Auto Adjust Unpaid Items. Please be very, very careful. Once this is done, the only way it can be undone is to manually go through each line and undo the adjustments. Once you're ready, click the button, and the amount that was adjusted off will be displayed on the screen. Clicking OK will close both those windows. And we can see that every line has now turned green, indicating that there is no outstanding balance on these services. And if we go to the Adjust Off column, we can see that all the total charges have been moved from the carrier section to the Adjust Off column. Let's look at another claim, Tracy Triple's first claim, and go over the manual adjusting of specific amounts. Let's say we get a notice from the carrier that they're not going to pay the full portion of this $15, but rather just $10, and the patient needs to pick up the other $5. Currently, they're set to cover all $15 in the program. So what we do is we highlight the amount, type in the desired amount, in this case 10, and you'll notice that that $5 immediately and automatically goes to the Adjust Off column. However, I still need the patient to pay this $5. So what I do is I go to the patient portion on this service line and type in $5. It is no longer under the Adjust Off column, but now under the patient portion column. As stated before, the total of the service as it was entered equals the carrier portion plus the patient portion plus the adjustment portion. Now, if the service below is a similar situation, but the patient doesn't have to cover the remaining portion, I can simply highlight it, put in 10, and then leave it as it is because the rest has been adjusted off. The patient's not going to pay, the carrier's not going to pay the $5, so nobody's going to pay it. Now, if I wanted to record a discount instead of an adjustment, I could do that by reducing this by the discount amount. Let's say I'm going to do $30 to make a $5 discount. Again, the amount automatically goes to the Adjust Off column. I would select the discount field, type in $5, and it would appear there instead. Up here we see some balances that have been accounted for. This carrier paid the full amount they owed, and so it turned green. I cannot reduce this portion anymore because it has been paid off as $150. If I were to try to type in $149, it would automatically go back to $150 because the carrier has already paid $150. If I needed to adjust off an amount that has been paid on, I could do something along the lines of a refund or a transfer to move this payment portion somewhere else so that I could then adjust off the money. Down here at the bottom, we see a different looking section, mostly covered in gray in a grid-like format. This is all the specific transaction information in regards to the selected service. Right now I have the new patient comprehensive exam selected, but if I click adjustment, the information changes to reflect that. Basically, this breaks down line by line what went down with this service and any payments in regards to this service. Here we can see the date and time it was entered, the source, in this case the carrier, and this is the amount charged in the form of a positive figure, the user that may have entered it, date and time entered again, a place to put any adjustment codes or adjustment reason codes. This pertains mostly to the 837 electronic billing. And over here we have a notes section and the transaction type. The first one was a charge and the next one was a payment. As we can see, the carrier was charged $35 and they've also paid $35. If we click this one where we made adjustments and discounts, we can see the initial charge of $35 here, an adjustment off of the carrier for $5, and a creation of a $5 discount as represented over here under transaction type. Using this section can be very helpful if you're trying to track what happened with a particular payment or service. Speaking of payments, if I click a payment, such as this $15 payment, we can see where the payment was attributed to down here at the bottom. We can see that $10 from the patient was sent to an adjustment on 7/26, and that $5 from the patient was sent to a cervical collar on 7/26 as well. Just a little above this section, we have the total button. But before we discuss the total button, let's discuss these totals and balances over here. This is the culmination of the entire ledger and the figures within. Here we have an on-account balance, which is 0 right now. And here we have the total charged amount. This is the carrier balance, and this is how much the carrier has been charged. This is how much the carrier paid. Here we have the amount the patient has been charged, how much they've paid, and their remaining balance, any amounts that have been discounted or adjusted off, and then the total remaining balance. Note that the total balance reflects the on account if there's any. So if I had about $100 on account, this would actually read $77.87 instead of $177.87. Now, back to the total button. If I were to go back up in time in the ledger here, such as 8/23/2011, and click the total button, it would give me the totals down here up until that date. You can see that the figures have changed to accommodate this new date. If I scroll back down, click 7/26, hit the total button again, the charges are more similar to what we saw just a second ago. Over here near the left, we have another printing icon which will print out the ledger in a few different ways. First, we can select the date range of the services and payments we want displayed. Leaving this blank, going to today's date will display everything in the ledger. Clicking Layout, we have the default layout, which will more or less show you what you see on the ledger. We have a section that will highlight outstanding balances. We have a selection that will show carrier billing dates. Another selection that shows even more billing info related to the services. And then finally a report with the estimated secondary amounts once the primary has been paid. Go ahead and take a look at these when you can to see which ones are best for your purposes. When you're ready, you can preview or print whichever layout you've selected. You'll notice that below that print icon, we have D1 through D8 here, indicating which diagnoses are being pointed to on a particular service. Currently none display because I have a payment selected up at the top as indicated by this black arrow here. If I were to click a particular service, however, the diagnoses that this service is pointing to will appear down here in the bottom left. If I click to a different service and it's pointing to different diagnoses, the information would change down here. One final trick is in the bottom left-hand corner of the top section of the ledger here, we see a small black bar. If I hover my mouse over it, the icon will change to two arrows pointing in the left and right direction. If I click it and drag it to the right, it splits the ledger into two different views. This way, I can stay looking at the visit date, info, the CPT code, etc., but I can drag it all the way over here to the billing information as well, so I can look at two different things at once. Note that it only splits the top screen and the bottom screen stays as one. That concludes walking through the patient files, patient claims, and the patient ledgers.